Jack Rowlett, a political commentator from Young Voices UK, is here. Jack, good morning.
Good morning.
Can we start with these kind of sources that have spoken to the Times about Labour's plans to make it easier, really, for you to legally change your gender, which I think, coming off the back of the Cass report, may be raising sort of a few eyebrows.
Yeah, I think reducing unnecessary bureaucracy and making processes for transgender people more humane is a worthwhile goal. You know, these are often very vulnerable people. I think that's absolutely an area that needs focus. But I think what's controversial and potentially a step in the wrong direction is this idea of making the process less medicalized, which is what Labour is talking about as being reported in the Times today, and potentially reducing the number of people required to sign off to obtain a gender recognition certificate to just a single person, and potentially shifting that role onto GPs. And I think that's a big step in the wrong direction, because we know that GPs are already overburdened and they lack the kind of detailed knowledge of gender dysphoria and this kind of issue as a whole, to be able to make accurate calls. So I think this is not a step in the right direction on that front. And I think actually part of the problem is, yes, there are some people who are not the gender that they're born as, and the state and the healthcare system needs to be there for those people, and it needs to provide humane support for them. But actually, when you demedicalize things, you end up with people for whom perhaps the issue they're experiencing is not a gender-based one. Perhaps it's actually something else, and those people slip through the cracks. But I do think it's good that we've seen, Labour at least admitting that they don't want to follow the sort of Scottish example of, going too far in the self-ID direction with all the issues that's caused, and that they are saying that, they are maintaining a commitment to female-only spaces, because I think that's really important too.
Yeah, you think even a sort of kind of perceived relaxation of the process is going to be politically quite challenging for the Labour Party to sort of pitch to the public?
Absolutely. I think it's going to prove highly controversial. And I do think it's really surprising that this is what Labour are, spending political capital on at this point in the electoral cycle, especially, as you mentioned, so soon after the Cass review as well.
OK, more on that in a little bit. Other stories today. I mean, it's going to be a very busy sort of political week, but I think this is going to cause, maybe some controversy. Front page of the Telegraph, protest groups like Just Stop Oil or Let's Say Extinction Rebellion, I mean, we know all of them, will be forced to pay compensation to people whose lives they disrupt. Do you think this is a good idea?
Well, they are so frustrating, and I think it's high time we do something about their disruptive tactics. I think we do have to be really careful, though, because when you're dealing with clamping down on protest, it's really important to strike that balance. And I think we do have to tailor things to targeting illegal behavior. And I think if protesters are doing things that are illegal, then absolutely it's right that there's some form of recompense for the people they're targeting, who incidentally are normally ordinary people and not the oil barons or bankers who they go on about all the time. But I think actually part of the focus has to remain on policing before the event as well, and during the event, because actually compensating victims after the fact is all well and good. But if you're not actually tackling the root cause of these protesters, taking these actions, and you're not stopping them from doing it in the moment, then you're still seeing that disruption. You're still seeing that hit to ordinary people's lives. You're still seeing that hit to the economy. So I think that, it's a nice idea. I'm not sure if in practice it will work completely. But there are other proposals being mooted as well.
Are you nervous of sort of, charging protesters for disruption seems to sort of, do we really want to make it more difficult for people to protest? I mean, part of the point of a protest is that it does cause headaches and disruption. Otherwise, what's the point?
Yeah, I think it's that fine line between disruption, which ultimately most protests cause, and that kind of deliberate, targeted obstruction of people being able to actually work or get to places they need to get to. I think that's not reasonable, because at that point, you're kind of disrupting.
What's a reasonable level of disruption?
Well, I think stuff like noise, for example, we've heard, complaints about noise that protests make, or chants in some instances. And I think often that it's not appropriate to clamp down on that. But if you're stopping people from driving somewhere, I think you're actually attacking their rights to be able to live their life. And I think it's that form of protest that needs to be clamped down on. But absolutely, you have to be really careful. You have to strike that balance because there are, legitimate free speech concerns and free assembly
Of course, and
concerns.
we
And
want protests to be able to, in some cases, definitely
absolutely,
be effective. There may be protests about this. Front page of The Guardian, vice-chancellors and former ministers have warned that the cash crisis facing universities is so serious that the next government will have to urgently raise tuition fees. If you are paying £9,000 a year, which you may feel like some of your lectures are still on Zoom and they are few and far between when you've got those lectures, you might think, how on earth am I supposed to pay for even more and be saddled with even more student debt at the other end of university?
well, yeah, and as someone who was paying 9 grand a year in relative recent memory, it does pain me to say this, but I think the current system is completely unsustainable, and ultimately we do need these tuition fee rises because otherwise universities are going to go bankrupt, and it's such an important sector in the UK. We have world leading universities. We do need to protect that. We need to protect the quality of education and the quality of research. And at the moment, it's just utterly unsustainable because it hasn't risen in over a decade, and also it's conflicting with other parts of the government's policy approach because we've seen all these concerns about a number of foreign students and the kind of migration impact that that has. Actually, the reason why, or part of the reason why universities are so reliant on foreign students is because they can charge them huge amounts of money because it's not capped,
Yeah.
and
I mean, it looks
British
like
students are not paying the full cost.
the recommendation is that vice chancellors sort of said you need to increase the fees by sort of £2,000 to £3,500 a year for each student. There is another part of this problem, though, isn't it? And that is the student loan system feels broken as well. People see it as a
Yeah, it
tax that they're
does.
just paying forever, and in some cases
Yeah,
they will never pay it off.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is a completely broken system, and it doesn't reflect the quality of the course as well, because students are not having to kind of face upfront in any way the kind of cost of the course. It means that they kind of just naturally say, oh well, 9 grand a year, every course is 9 grand a year pretty much, that's what you have to pay. And it doesn't take into account the fact that different courses offer different levels of value, so it's not encouraging students to actually think about that. And it's in essence protecting those universities that are not offering courses that offer good value for money. So the whole system needs reform, and
Mm.
I mean, realistically, it's not going to be this government that does it. It's going to be a challenge for the Labour Party, really, isn't it?
Yeah, and I'm sure neither political party is going to want to focus on this before the election. I mean, for Keir Starmer, the idea of raising tuition fees would be extremely a difficult one, again, for the Labour Party to pitch to the public. Let's pause that there for just a moment. Let's talk about the Conservatives, because Chris Heaton-Harris, the latest Conservative MP, now to say, do you know what, before the next general election, I'm tapping out. This is, I don't even think we can call it a trend now. This is a growing problem for Rishi Sunak, that so many of his colleagues are saying, do you know what, I've had enough.
Yeah, well, it's an exodus, really, isn't it? I think he's the 66th, and it does look. The Conservatives have done such a poor job in office of late that I think they do need to completely rebuild after the next election, and they need to return to their kind of core principles of free markets, fiscal responsibility, kind of sensible attitudes on migration and cultural issues. But I think if you lose so many of the kind of experienced people in the party, it actually makes that more difficult, because it's all well and good to kind of hand things on to the next generation, but
Mm.
you're losing so much institutional experience, so much knowledge of the party, so much knowledge of government. And there is a danger that this actually contributes to them being out of power for a very, very long time, because they just don't have the experience necessary to seem like a credible opposition to the public. And I think that's what will be concerning, much more so than the prospects for Rishi Sunak, because I think it's a done deal at that point. But actually looking beyond the next general election, the fact that there are so many standing down now, I think it's storing up massive problems for the future of the party.
I think arguably you're right, Jack. Thank you. Jack Rowlett, political commentator with Young Voices UK.